You're listening to the Valley Current.
So welcome into the Valley Current. We've been doing a series. We've now modernized to actually get the Zoom function to work, because previously we did it by phone very effectively, but now we'll probably have both audio and video and maybe even some screens that we share about what's going on here. And I apologize for my own technical dilemma. I had a few issues myself trying to get my camera to work, and maybe this stuff will become seamless over time. But you're still located at home and you're in your little home office library there. I see you got like a million books behind you, so you're
not, that's you're not all of them.
I know, by far. I have to say I'm very impressed, because even in the law firm we used to have thousands of books, but people were like, why do we need books? We just get on the computer. And I still love books, but I'll tell you, no one wants to shelf them, and no one wants to deal with, hey, the book is lost, and these treatises with chapters that are missing and so on. So it's a new world where the computer seems to have taken over.
Well, I have a very large scientific library, mostly focused on books on aging and other documents related to aging.
Well, I always say that between you and Dr. Walter Bortz, we should establish a section of some library somewhere, like I said, Portola Valley, that is just about aging and longevity and health span and lifespan and work span. And you guys, between the two of you, there's probably some duplication, but I bet you have 10,000 books collectively between the two of you on that subject or on those subjects.
Well, I don't know that I have 10,000, but I have a lot, and some of them are of historical nature.
Right.
And it's interesting that you should mention the future home for my library, because I have instructed my children, and two of them are executrixes, to hire an archivist to help dispose of my library and my papers. I have papers that go back to the 1950s, many of which are historically important, many of them sent by very well-known scientists and politicians, and it would be a tragedy to lose all of that historical material. But it's not organized well enough to make choices now. And I'm guiding my children to hire an archivist on my death to do that job and find.
Why wouldn't you just get someone like Google, or I guess they've got a health branch called Calico that would actually want to just put all that stuff online and make it available in a very wide way?
Well, I haven't thought of hiring somebody to copy all this, because it would take an enormously long period of time and probably be very costly.
Well, it would be like Google budget, which is they've got all the scanners, they've got all the automation,
yes,
they've got all the ways to do text recognition, and it sounds like chronologically maybe that would be the approach. They'd obviously index it by every word, every date, everything. I can tell you that there was a guy who was very famous. Arguably, he's one of the famous people of Silicon Valley. He created the actual mouse device and the use. Doug Engelbert is who I'm referring to. And there was a nonprofit that got established to just collect all of his papers and put them online, and all of his drawings, because he had lots of drawings of how he saw the internet evolving. I'll at some point send you some of these drawings, because they're in a book that I wrote. He gave me permission, the estate gave me permission to put the drawings in, of how he saw this notion of collective intelligence and the use of the internet to kind of bring us all together in a very collectively intelligent way. He was definitely before his time, and he was the inventor of lots of things that he never received a dime for. And whenever I think of your story, I think of Doug Engelbert, who, by the way, we actually helped at Davis, Stafford, Kelman, and Fenwick, now Fenwick and West. And we helped his estate and his nonprofit and the foundation. And I'm still helping the people that are still carrying out that message. I'm not sure if Fenwick and West is, since Bill is now retired from there, but I'm still helping here at Computer Law Group. And they've got some interesting material that they're creating derivative works from about where does the future of the internet go, a little bit like along the lines of some of the topics we've been discussing about where's the future of scientific research in the area of your studies go. And, or do you think that that research has pretty much been wrestled to the ground, the research you started 50, 60, 70 years ago?
Well, it's interesting. You should provide that information. I hope you won't mind if I ask my children, or one of them at least, to contact you for some guidance in this area.
Right. I'm happy to help, because I think that Google will be all over this.
At one time, when I posed this question to the National Library of Medicine, this was about 15 years ago, they were very eager to have everything that I own. And but since that time, of course, there's been a lot of turnover of personnel, as has happened in every organization over that period of time. And I don't know how receptive they would be now. But there's another archive for gerontological material, and that's at the University of Maryland. They have the materials from the estate of Nathan Schock, who is recognized as the father of American gerontology. But anyhow, I'm happy that you mentioned that, and I'll ask one of them. I'll make a note on the documents that I'm leaving for them to contact you for guidance.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, look, I think
I also have a large collection of historical photographs of conferences and personalities who are well known in various fields of science. There's also a bibliophile in Novato. His last name is Norman. I've been in contact with him for another completely different reason. And I have his name on my list of people to be contacted, because he has a huge network of professionals who are interested in the archives of scientists, which have become very popular in recent years. Archives of well-known scientists have even been marketed and command pretty good prices.
Well, that's always the interesting choice, because I'm sure if you went to kind of a rare books person for the older books that you have, and even this notion of the older papers, like an original letter signed by a famous person, whoever it is, whoever that person is, those documents have certain value in the marketplace, as you're saying.
Yes, well, that's all part of my collection. Anyhow, why don't we start with the material that you wanted me to cover?
Right. I'm really interested right now, just to make it a preliminary observation. You look pretty fit there and look like you're in very good energy levels, kind of health. This is the first one we're doing with video, and I have to say, you look like you're in your 60s or so. Are you feeling that way as well? Because you definitely don't look like you're in your 90s.
I don't know how I look, obviously, but I feel fine. I have trivial health problems that are not even worth mentioning, and are the usual annoyances of getting old. But thankfully, I have no major health problems.
I mean, are you eating one meal a day, 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day? I'm kind of curious what your routine is, because I know here in Silicon Valley, the big thing is fasting 16 to 17 hours a day and eating one meal a day. And there are some people that just live by that, and they also then fast one weekend every other weekend, like the entire day of Saturday or the entire day of Sunday. And they think there's a lot of accelerated repair from a cellular point of view that happens while fasting. I don't know if that's something you've ever done or you've ever considered doing, or you're more on the American approach of 3 meals a day.
No, I've never changed my diet in the direction of having it affect my health in some way. When my wife Ruth died 3 years ago, and even before that, my tendency was, and now is, to eat 2 meals a day. I have a relatively small breakfast, but a larger dinner. And my breakfast is more of a brunch because by the time I get up and do the chores necessary to maintain the house, dishwashing or loading my dishwasher, and other chores that are too trivial to mention, I don't get to eat my brunch until about between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning. And I usually bring that up to my computer and eat that small breakfast while working. And I usually quit my writing and editing and whatever else I'm doing on the computer at about anywhere between 3 and 4 o'clock. Then I take care of other chores that remain and do a lot of gardening that I'm in the midst of now, because I have a small greenhouse that I built many, many years ago when I first moved to my present location. And I have just put in most of the seedlings that I raise all of my vegetables from seeds, and I still have just a few more to do. But what I have planted are now growing very well. I'll be able to harvest leaf lettuce in a week or two. They grow very rapidly. And then my dinner is taken at about 6 o'clock, and I prepare that myself from and that takes a while, of course, to do some preparation or heating if it's something already made. But my diet is mixed. I have favored foods that span many cuisines, so that I don't purposely have a diet or eat little or not at all for periods of time in an attempt to have it affect my health. I've never done that, and I doubt that I ever will, because I have no reason to believe that what you described as what other people are doing, I have no reason to believe that they work. There is no data showing that humans who follow some of those procedures, that it affects their aging or even their longevity. There's no evidence whatsoever.
So do you not believe in what others generally talk about, that diet or food is really a form of medicine, and we should think of it that way, that there's some medicinal value one way or the other, either good or bad, in what you choose to eat? For example, red meat has been the subject of a lot of controversy. I even have folks who would say, red meat, that's just the beginning. There's so many other things you're not supposed to eat. And they make a list. And I'm going to give you some of the lists that they put down, because I actually was looking at this today and I was saying, wow, if you really take this list seriously, it's like, what happens to the joy of life and the joy of eating? Is it like you can't have sugar, you can't have salt, you can't have dairy? That's 3. No alcohol, no bread, no carbs. That's 4, 5, and 6. No red meat, no other meat, no fish, no seafood. That's 7, 8, 9. Nothing that has any eyes, as in like 2 eyeballs or even 1 eyeball. Like anything that has any form of living creature to it. I guess a shrimp even has eyes, and that's seafood. A lobster has eyes, and that's seafood. A crab has eyes. So it really is kind of a green-based diet. It is very much about vegetables. And
what the diet's supposed to do?
Well, the diet is giving you micronutrients and nutrients and taking care of.
What is all that supposed to do in respect to your health or your aging or your longevity?
Well, the belief is that that is directly correlated with inflammation and that people are getting obese because they're eating excessive amounts of bad calories. I mean, not on this list, but I think they would say should also be a no-no is no oil, no butter, nothing that represents a fat, nothing that represents a bad fat, let's put it that way. So conceptually, there's definitely a regime in play where people believe what you eat is what you are, and that you should eat to live and not live to eat. And of course, I come from an Italian family that they always believed that cuisine was very much part of life and the enjoyment of life. So they definitely like to eat, and they still do. My dad lived to 90 and smoked, as we talked about before, and drank. I mean, he drank a lot of beer. I want to say he was good for a 6-pack of beer a night, 7 days a week. So that's 40 cans of beer in a given week, 12-ounce cans. That's, 500 ounces of beer a week. I don't know where you would put that in the scheme, but he was otherwise not fat. He definitely worked a lot and exercised a lot in terms of moving stuff around in what he did for work, because he had a very manual type of job. So he burned all those calories, whatever they were, from all that beer and all the food and all the bread that he ate. So he definitely did not follow the list that I just gave, but he lived to 90, and he would say he had an enjoyable life, at least from a food point of view. I don't know what he would say about other things.
Well, again, the goal of doing what that list asks to be done and not to be done is unstated, and that's the problem. If they argue that this will provide good health, then they have to define good health. It's very puzzling without knowing what the definition of terms are and what the goal of these diets and instructions on food intake are supposed to produce. In respect to some of the items that you mentioned, I have never drunk alcohol in any form, beer or wine or certainly liquor, with the exception of once or twice a year. If I'm at a party or a gathering where people are serving wine, I certainly will drink a glass of wine, but that happens a couple times a year at the most. And I don't drink any alcohol for one simple reason: I don't like the taste.
Ah, okay. Because alcohol is usually kind of a big part of a lot of people getting older will say to any sort of dietitian or nutritionist, you're not going to take my glass of wine away, or you're not going to take my glass of beer away. My dad lived life to get to 7 or 8 o'clock when he could open that first can of beer. And I would see him and he would go through a full 6-pack. Now, maybe somebody would say, your dad had a problem, but man, he could manage it. And I never saw him drunk. And I have to say, I think by and large, he could hold his alcohol, but he just didn't. He drank standard Rheingold in New York. The brand was called Rheingold. There was another one called Ballantine. This is old time stuff. Schaefer, the one beer to have when you're having more than one. The Rheingold's a dry beer, or Rheingold's a fine beer. They had a little jingle. All of them had a jingle that I remember. But he was good for a 6-pack a night. And I never saw him drunk. And I saw him as someone that felt it was almost another form of nutrition for him. I mean, it obviously had calories to it, right?
Yes, of course. Well, I also don't eat a lot of meat or a lot of fat, not because I have that as a conscious goal. It's just that I like to have a lot of variety in what I eat, which is, I think, useful. But diets of one form or another may have some effect on cardiovascular disease, too much lipid, too much fat. But there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that any diet has any effect on the aging process. There is no diet that has been demonstrated to decrease the deficits of aging. There is no diet that affects longevity with proof in humans. The effects of diet are perhaps and almost certainly under extreme conditions on aspects of health, but that's a completely separate area from aging and longevity determination. So I don't fuss over what I eat. I have maybe 15 or 20 major things that I like. They're all diverse, and I like to experiment with other kinds of foods that are not on my present list. So I do get a variety of nutrients.
But you're doing it all on your own and without what one would call like a industrialized meal plan. Like if you were in,
I have no plan whatsoever. Nothing.
Right. If you were in a facility, let's call it assisted living or hospice or hospital or any of those things, they have like an industrial plan, which probably mostly is garbage compared to what you're using as farm to table, backyard to table nutrition in your garden from seeds. Are you using Burpee seeds, or do you have a brand in mind for the brand of seeds that you're using? I'm curious.
No, the brands make no difference whatsoever in respect to the genetics of the seeds. If you just choose them by their named varieties, not by the seed company itself. So I look for the cheapest seeds. There's some certain varieties that I like, especially of tomatoes. So I have a variety of tomato plants growing at the moment. I have a mesclun collection of lettuce, which are varieties of lettuce, most of whose names I can't recall, but it's a variety of different colored lettuces and shapes and sizes. I have a standard seeds of carrots and spinach, so I don't look for anything unusual at all.
Where do you buy the seeds? Are you buying them by mail order, or are you just buying them in a local store, or what?
Well, most of the time I harvest my own seeds from the preceding season's plants. That's where most of my seeds come from. If for some reason or another I don't have seeds of a particular plant, then I will buy the seeds at some garden store.
Garden store nearby?
I have a chronic postnasal drip that I've had all my adult life, and
that's what's actually keeping your mouth from having any type of COVID virus, because it's washing some type of acidic or otherwise clarifying liquid through your nasal and other bodily cavities, right?
Well, that's my unproven theory, that my throat is constantly washed with mucus that I have to get rid of.
Right.
2 or 3 times a day, as I've just done. But I have no evidence that it does what you say, although it does make common sense.
Right. So you've actually done
something. The store that I get my seeds from mostly is not near me, it's near you. It's the garden store on, what is the street?
Woodside Road?
No, it's in Mountain View.
Oh, in Mountain View, okay.
But it's immaterial where I get the seeds.
Right. Well, but you're doing something pretty unique, which is in your 90s, you're actually growing your own food from seeds that you either harvest yourself or get from the previous harvest. And meaning you're tilling and you're watering and you're doing, I guess you probably don't even use fertilizer, or do you?
I do use a fertilizer, yeah, a mixture of the critical cations that are necessary for plant growth.
Are you composting as well?
I do compost. I haven't used my compost for a couple of years because it gets blended into the turf where I where I put it, and I frequently forget to use any of it, and I rely almost entirely on the chemical on specific chemicals.
Right. Right. So what do you see right now in terms of this big issue of when does everyone get back to work? You, of course, have been doing your work consistently without a hiccup at all because your work is right there in your home. You've got a nice office, you got a lot of books, you got the fastest internet probably in the world with the fiber that you have. You got a i7 Intel high-powered Dell computer, and everything is working for you just as it is. You're pretty self-sufficient. So what do you see when you watch TV and there's a big controversy between what New York is going to do versus what, say, Florida is doing versus what Texas is doing versus what, all these other states, all the governors have different views about when to get restarted. I guess one governor said today is the day and announced that today they're all going back to work, and maybe other governors are going to follow, but there's a worry about a relapse, right? A legitimate worry about a relapse.
Well, to answer the first part of your questions, my lifestyle has not been affected by this virus at all. If it has, it's been trivial. I have my lifestyle simply hasn't changed. In respect to what's happening in this state and in other states, I think the hodgepodge of what's being done with one state compared to another will soon reveal if the states are honest enough, and that's a big question. In respect to the behavior of some of the governors, and whether they will or will not reveal whether the deaths or frequency of disease is increasing as a result of their political decisions. And that's going to be a serious problem in respect to some states. And I think I read this morning that there was one or two states in which the governor had announced that they weren't going to reveal any more data on deaths or frequency of positive tests for this disease. And that is really worrisome. But there is really no way to predict what's going to happen in those states that have decided to open up society to the point where people are going to now mingle in public places closely. So we really just have to wait. In the next month or two, we'll hopefully find out what mistakes have been made and what governors like the governor of New York State and California have done to convince their populations to continue as they have for another month at least in respect to maintaining lives at home, wearing masks in public, maintaining social separation. Those things I think should be continued because the curves, which is what is a general jargon being used, until those curves show much greater descent.
So, for example, take a state like, I guess, Wyoming. The governor was on the TV yesterday. I guess they went back to work today in Wyoming. I think the whole population there is under 500,000 people. I mean, literally the entire state of Wyoming. It doesn't even have 1 million people. I don't know how many COVID cases it has. I don't think it's had many. I don't think it's had many deaths. The density for the entire state of Wyoming has got to be, like one person per square mile or something, all things considered, for the size of that state. Now, obviously, there are a few cities in Wyoming that are big and probably have some density. But would you say the right thing is, yeah, different states should experiment? That's why we have 50 states with 50 governors. It's like one big experiment. And let's see what the experimental results are. And different states will do different things over time, and you'll see what the data is as a result. New York City is probably at the greatest risk and probably should have the slowest number of people returning to work because the density is so high, right?
Well, the risks are a function of the density of the populations. New York State has a very dense population in New York City. In upper New York State, it's about like Montana or Wyoming. And in areas like that where people have very little in the way of interaction with other than those who live in the same house, the likelihood of having this disease spread is minimal. So it's not only a function of a state per se, but of the regions in the states. Clearly, if you live on a ranch with your family, and the ranch is 1,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 acres, and you have little, if any, interaction with other people for weeks or months on end, then clearly there's little, if any, risk in a situation like that. Compared with a tenement house on the Lower East Side in New York, there's a world or universe of difference.
Right.
So the problem that the governors have is deciding where to draw the line in respect to where the minimal risk is and where the maximum risk is in respect to population density. And that's a tough problem.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think of this as the city of New York, if they were really being risk adverse, they wouldn't get back to work for probably 6 months until really you have a sense that the numbers are way down and that the healing process or death process, whichever way you want to look at it, has run its course in whatever way it's going to run its course in New York City, where there is so much density?
Well, I think that Governor Cuomo is on the right track. He appears to practice the most conservative acts and make decisions that are painful for the population, for the dense populations in New York State in general. And I would subscribe to what he's doing more than what I would subscribe to some of the Midwestern governors who are letting everything out at once and crossing their fingers in the hope that nothing tragic happens. So it's a game we're going to have to live with for many more months. And the hope is that some chemical therapies will appear before the year or two that's necessary for a vaccine to be discovered and proven effective.
So you think that this Gilead remdesivir, do you think that that's kind of a partial, if you're sick, this will accelerate the healing or certainly won't hurt? Do no harm is part of the story here for doctors. Obviously, I don't know whether this stuff will prove itself to be without consequence or not. But if it helps some percentage of folks, then great, right?
Well, as been observed, the effects with remdesivir have been minimal and constitute nothing more than a hint at the moment. But there are many, many chemicals out there that have been used as antivirals for other viruses that are under test now and stand a good chance of being effective. What has been forgotten in all of this, and I happen to have lived through the history, is that in the 1960s, the thought that a chemical of any form could be used to intervene with a disease caused by a virus was unthinkable. It was only the efforts of scientists who I knew very well, a man by the name of Ernest Herman, whose name has disappeared from everybody's list of the history. Ernie Herman had worked at the Shearing Corporation in New Jersey, and he proved that in vitro, that is in cell culture, where human cells or other cells were grown, treated with chemical potential therapeutic agents, and then having various viruses introduced into that system, he showed for the first time that there were chemicals that could, in fact, stop the progress of viruses. One of the ones that he discovered that's, I think, still used to this day, I don't know what the trade name is for it now, was used to prevent virus infections in eyes and to treat existing eye diseases of one particular type. But Ernie Herrmann then, at that time, suffered enormously by the gray eminences of the day, who said that his work was useless, that only chemicals can interfere with the growth of bacteria, but not viruses. And that's why antibiotics were so popular and they're so effective, of course, of course are ineffective against viruses. But Ernie Herrmann was the first champion of the use, or at least of research on the use of chemical therapy in instances of virus diseases.
Well, do you see him as not getting adequate credit for his famous paper, The Tragedy of Viral Diagnosis?
He's gotten no credit at all, and that is a tragedy. He should be recognized.
Right. I mean, this is the tragedy of science in some ways, which is there are so many people that contribute so much. I'm putting his paper up on the screen that was in the Postgraduate Medical Journal in September of 1970.
How did you access it so quickly?
Because I have the ability with this super search thing called Google to type in his name. It's amazing what that stuff can do for you. And I put his paper up at 6 pages. Back then, people wrote papers that said something in less than 10 pages. You may remember that time. Now, of course, you got 70 pages with 70 footnotes, and they don't say anything. But here's a guy that wrote something that we probably all should be reading now, and it's got a bibliography, and it's got some footnotes as well.
I'm glad that Ernie Herrmann's name has now at least been recorded in your news.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll put this into the notes as well, because I think you're right that there's a lot of wisdom.
You can see
from
the
50,
title,
60 years ago.
Viral Diagnosis.
Right. There's a lot of wisdom in papers that are not really hitting the mainstream. And I'm guessing that Fauci probably is not even reading, or maybe perhaps he hasn't even read. And you'd say to yourself, how does a guy like Fauci not have his arms around all of this? Of course.
Well, I don't think Tony was at NIH when Ernie Herrmann made the discoveries that he did.
Right.
Ernie did his work at the Shearing Laboratories, which are now defunct or taken over by another company. But he worked at Shearing Labs in New Jersey. So
why don't we agree to get back together next week if you can do it? I'll try to be on time and make sure I'm there by 3:00, because obviously this was my fault. I apologize for that.
Well, there's no apologies necessary. I'm happy to talk to you no matter how late you are, and I'll look forward to talking to you again next Friday.
Thanks very much, Len. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend. You take care.
And you too, take care, and my regards to Lee.
Of course. Bye-bye. I'll let her know.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.